Hey guys, it is the end of another month, and so that means I need to wrap up all those things that I read. This month I did not read as much as I normally did, mostly because the books that I had chosen for my TBR often fell into the category of things that I was the least excited about that were on my physical TBR shelf, and I ended up DNFing all of them. So there's 6 DNFs. You will see that video on Thursday. But that meant that I didn't actually fully finish as many books as I normally do. There were 5 books and 3 graphic novels and 2 mangas. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. The first book that I read is called The Queen is Dead by Kate Locke. It is the second book in the Immortal Empire series, which starts with God Save the Queen. In this book, this series, we are following Xandra, who is a half vampire. It's essentially like the world is essentially like, what if Queen Victoria were still reigning because she's a vampire, and all of the London nobles are vampires, and all the Scottish ones are werewolves. So that's the world that Xandra lives in, and she is half vampire. And in the second book, the other halfies are turning up missing, and she's got to kind of look into it. This book suffered from middle book syndrome. This is a trilogy, and oh goodness, guys, it definitely was a middle book. It wrapped up the storylines from the first book, great, and it set up the storyline for the third book, great. It just didn't have much more than that. The overall plot for this book was just weak, honestly. But in its defense, the world building and the writing was actually a lot better than that first book that was there. Just how the world building was handled, the writing structure, it was edited a little bit better. So kudos for that. And then the other downside is that the main character of Xandra is just horribly whiny. Understandably so. With the events that happened in this first book, it like changed her life, and she's kind of whiny and all this kind of stuff, and I totally get it. I just did not want to read it. So I gave it I think 3 stars. Honestly, it probably should be 2.75. I didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping. It's a middle book. I am still excited to read book 3. After that, I read Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, Volume 1, Spider-Geddon by Seanan McGuire. I did read this because I love Seanan McGuire's writing. That I did not have any special affinity for Spider-Gwen. It really was just for the writer. It turns out that Spider-Geddon is actually an event in the Marvel Universe, and so I did not know that. And that is very unfortunate for me because the first 3 issues are essentially Gwen Stacy trying to get to her friends who are fighting in this Spider-Geddon kind of event. Basically, these things are trying to kill all the different spider versions across all the different dimensions, alternate realities. And she's trying to get that to them to help them fight. That's the first 3 issues. And that is all totally fine, and you don't actually need to read the event to understand it. Unfortunately, issue 4 dealt with the aftermath of this event. Who lived, who died, the whole thing. So I got completely spoiled for this, which was not really all that great. But I do really love that she got an entire issue to really talk about the aftermath. What happened, why it happened, how are we going to, thinking about it at least, not really getting it super in depth because it's only 1 issue. But they also addressed grief and mourning and allowing these characters to do so because not everybody made it. And I think that's really, really important to do. And I'm glad she was able to do it. I also liked some of the things that she had to say about death and mourning and grief, how you yourself handle grief and how you take care of yourself and all these kinds of things. And I thought that was a really good thing to do. The drawing and the colors palette was pretty good. I enjoyed it. this is not enough for me to know if I actually like Gwen Stacy. I am going to read the next one, and I am actually going to read the Spider-Geddon event too. But I mean, I don't think it was really for me, to be perfectly honest. After that, I did read Across the Great Barrier by Patricia C. Wrede, the second book in the Frontier Magic series. This is essentially Old West with magic. We are following our main character of F. Rothmer, who is the 13th child. She was always told that she's going to bring a lot of doom and misery from being the 13th child. And so she kind of like didn't really want to learn magic, and so she didn't. And then she finally did. Now she has a very interesting way of looking at it. And that helped her at the end of book 1, of course. In this book, she is going beyond the Great Barrier, which is this huge spell that essentially keeps all the really wild wildlife away from the settlements. And she's going to kind of do a survey and see what's out there with her professor. This is a middle grade series, and it is not generally my favorite plot where you're just kind of following a character as they grow up. Not generally my favorite. However, I am still really, really enjoying this for everything else that it does. The thing that I enjoy the most is really kind of 3 parts. Number 1, F, before she makes a decision, will always stop and think. In the beginning, her twin brother is just like, you should do this thing, and here are all the reasons why you should do it, and here are all the like counter arguments, the objections you're going to have. She lets him talk for like 30 minutes, and then afterwards she says, you've clearly thought about this a lot. Now I need to do my thinking for myself before I make a decision. And I absolutely love that emphasis. And number 2, she is very clear that you do not have to know every step of the journey before you start. As long as you're pretty sure it's going to get you to the end result that you want, start anyway. And number 3, that if it turns out you are going in the wrong direction, whether it's because it's not taking you in the direction you thought, or because you no longer want that end goal, you can change your mind. You can do something else, and you just take a different course when you make that decision. And I think that those are such incredible things to have in a series. It's a great education for middle schoolers. It's a great reminder for adults. Like, I just really love that that's there. I love that F is still learning, even though she's out of school. I love that her twin brother, who is arrogant, has finally hit a brick wall. And I'm just, thank goodness, right? Like, I'm so excited for that. But, and then her friend William was amazing in this. I'm so sad we didn't get to see enough of him, but I am very excited for the next book, which is the last book in the series. After that, I read Claymore volumes 8 and 9 by Norihiro Yagi. This is my manga series that I am in the middle of, and it follows the Claymores, who are females who have taken on some of the essence of these monsters, and so that they can have the strength and speed to defeat the monsters. And we follow our main character of Claire, and Claire is interesting because she is literally the worst Claymore, like ranked last kind of thing. Makes her just like, how has she managed to survive, right? I liked the previous two volumes because we started delving into Claire's past and what makes her tick and all this kind of stuff that I find so interesting. And we got none of that in these 2 volumes, these 8 and 9. And it's hard because like, that's really what I wanted. We saw Claire learning how to be a better Claymore, but I just wanted more of her background. I just didn't get enough in the previous 2 volumes. And unfortunately, we introduced a lot of the other Claymores, which for me is unfortunate because they're drawn in such a way that I just can't tell the difference between them. So like, I'm struggling to follow the story, and we're building to this big battle, and I just don't know that I care. I am going to read the next 2 volumes because I am super hopeful that we will get more about Claire and it'll be interesting again, but I feel almost like that I might just be hoping in vain. I don't know. We're going to keep going until I figure out the point that I just cut the series off for not being good enough. Next up, I did read Off Ragnarok by Seanan McGuire. It is the third book in the Encrypted series. This is a series that follows the Price family, who is a family of cryptozoologists. They study the monsters, they interact with the monsters, and when the monsters are not behaving well, they kill the monsters. This is a series and where in the first two books we actually followed the main character of Wrede Price, who is the middle Price child, and in this one we switched over to her older brother Alex. In this book, he is studying reptiles out in Ohio, and people start turning up at his zoo dead and half turned to stone. So he needs to figure out why. I don't think I've ever read a series, apart from a romance series, where we actually switch narrators in the middle. And so I was not prepared for that. I was sitting here just missing all these old characters that I had grown to love, right? And it didn't help that in the first 100 pages, Alex is super whiny. I was just like, not loving this, guys. But after page 100, he did shift. He was so much better after that. I started to love his grandparents. They became much more prominent after that 100 pages. They're amazing. His cousin is, oh my gosh, I love her so much. In the previous the previous book, she kind of like did this big magic thing that kind of melted her brain a little bit. So she's in recovery, but a lot of what she says is nonsensical, and it just kind of, I just, for some reason, just kind of really love it. The storyline itself, I actually really liked it, because in the end, it's really about how the Price family is fallible, and that those failures in their past, sometimes others are going to hold it against them. And I just really appreciate that, because that's so much more realistic than always having people be like, oh yeah, I forgive and forget, you know. So I really liked that was a thing. The world building was amazing as per normal, because Seanan McGuire is amazing at world building. And so I think I gave that a 4.25 stars. It was not as good as the first book, but but I liked it more than the second book. After that, I read Perfect Lies by Kiersten White, the second book in the Mind Games duology. The first book, we are following the sisters of Annie and Fia, who are being exploited by this school, because it turns out that Annie can see the future and Fia has perfect instincts. Now Annie is blind, and she has been made and kind of never taught how to be independent, and so she can't leave on her own, and Fia can't leave her, and that's where we start the story. And so I'm not going to tell you much about this one, because I don't want to spoil anything for that first book. I love this book. This is a 5-star book for me. Wild Flailing. I did an entire review on it. I'll link it up in the cards and down below. But just real quick, Annie was a lot better in this one. She is like, she's always been naive and sheltered, and she's finally starting to grow out it. She's still naive, but she's making her way towards like learning and being much more independent. I really liked that the author chose to do a converging timeline between the two girls, and they finally meet up at the end. I really liked that. Fia is an unreliable narrator. I don't generally like that, and I loved it in this book. I could have used a book 3 or an epilogue or something, and we didn't get it, but like I loved that book. After that, I did read A Traitor in the Tunnel by Y.S. Lee, the third book in the Agency series, which starts with a spy in the house. It follows Mary Quinn, who is a spy in Victorian London, and her spy agency operates off of this idea that women are overlooked and underestimated, and that makes them the perfect spies. In this third book, Mary is actually working in Buckingham Palace trying to track down a thief, and that is supposed to be the main storyline, and it is so not. In this third book, they're actually wrapping up a lot of the background stories, the romance, the family, the agency, all these things, and all those things kind of take center stage. And this mystery of who the thief is important, but it's really not as primary as it like the mysteries have been in the previous 2 books. That being said, I really, really love these books. I was perfectly content to have that be a little bit more in the background as we wrapped up these other storylines. I thought it was really awesome. I read it so quickly, and I'm going to be very sad when I'm done with the next book, because the next book is the last book in the series. So really, really love that. I think I gave it 4.5 stars. Just so good. And then after that, I did read The Wicked and the Divine, volumes 1 and 2 by Kieron Gillen. I think they're called The Faust Act and Fandemonium. They collect the first 11 issues of the Wicked and Divine comics. And this is a series that essentially is alternate Earth, where every 90 years the gods are incarnated in like people who are already living, and these people become like the ultimate pop stars, and then they die in 2 years. Right? Perfect soap opera setup, right? And that's essentially what we have. Now these first 2 volumes, I kind of was trying to figure out like what they were about. And there is plot. We're following like Laura, who is this super fan, and there's like some mystery and she's trying to investigate it. There is legitimate plot. But honestly, we're really setting up the world, and we're setting up all the different characters, because there's a lot of them. It's 12 gods, right? And so we're spending a lot of time doing this setup. And so I'm assuming that in volumes 3 and 4, it's going to pivot more towards a like larger plot, less world building and more plot. I'm assuming. I still really enjoyed it. This is a reread. I picked up a lot more this time. I think that it is a lot of drama, and I'm just really excited to kind of go along for the ride. But that's it, guys. That is what I read for the month of November. Go ahead, let me know down below. What did you read for November? Did any of these books sound interesting to you? Let me know. And until next time, guys, I hope you have a happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.